weeks at the least.
So the conflict expanded into a new front just hours ago as Israel and the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah exchanged fire, shattering a truce that had been in place for about a year. Hezbollah says it was acting to avenge the death of Iran's supreme leader, and Israel responding in moves that threaten to expand the deadly conflict and destabilize the region as a whole. Video this morning shows explosions and smoke in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Meanwhile, fire and thick black smoke were seen rising earlier near the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait as the State Department urges U.S. citizens to shelter in place there. Over the weekend, 3 U.S. service members were killed in action in Kuwait, the first Americans to die in the war with Iran, although President Trump acknowledged there, quote, likely will be more. Iran's retaliation to Operation Epic Fury has been expansive, targeting many of its Middle East neighbors. As the country's top national security leader said late last night, Tehran, quote, will not negotiate with the United States. President Trump, meanwhile, told The Atlantic he's open to speaking to Iran's new leadership without specifying whom those talks would be with. He also told the New York Times the attack could last 4 or 5 weeks, but he did not lay out a clear plan for how power might be transferred to a new government. ABC's Jonathan Karl says the president told him the U.S. had identified possible candidates to take over Iran, but they, too, were killed in the initial attack. Quote, it's not going to be anybody that we were thinking because they're all dead. Second or third place is dead.
Jonathan Lemire, give us your latest reporting from the White House.
So, Joe, obviously, this is a defining moment for this presidency. Someone who President Trump, of course, in 2016, we know, vowed to end the forever wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, vowed he would not be entangled in a new Middle Eastern conflict. That no longer the case. What we're seeing here is, we heard from President Trump, is a lack of messaging really to the nation. He's recorded 2 videos that were put out on Truth Social, but has yet to do an address, perhaps from the Oval Office, as were customary from presidents at a time of war. He has yet to field a single question in a news conference. He has, though, done a series of quick phone calls with reporters, although noting, as Mika was starting to there, that messaging seemingly changing each and every time in terms of the length of this mission, some of the objectives of the mission, who might be next. And in that call with Jonathan Karl, it seems like they had identified possible leaders, but then, whoops, killed them too. So that, I think, is unnerving some here at home who aren't sure how long this war will last, what its objectives might be, and how many more Americans may be killed. We know 3 already have. The president, in his message yesterday, sort of saying that's the way it is in terms of the cost of conflict, suggesting there will be more. And we've seen footage this morning of a fighter jet downed in Kuwait, though the pilot seems to have escaped. And Richard Haass, I'm talking to people in the White House who are certainly pleased with the military objectives so far. And Joe's right at the top of the show. Venezuela is the driving force behind all of this. That was such a success. It has inspired President Trump to believe he can do the same here. There's some who already think Cuba could be next. So the military objectives are strong, but Iran's retaliation has also been widespread despite the decapitation strike. So talk to us about what you've seen in this first day or two in terms of Iran's ability to respond despite the damage inflicted, but also the sort of lack of messaging from the president to make the case to Americans why this conflict is happening, why it's in their interest.
Well, Jonathan, if a word comes to mind for me to describe what's going on now, it's undisciplined. As disciplined as the United States has been on the military side of this war, we have been undisciplined on the foreign policy and political side. We have yet to make the case to the country and the world as to why this war had to happen now. The president's been all over the place as to U.S. objectives. And in the clip you showed at the beginning of the show, if the complete realization of all U.S. objectives has to happen before this war ends, this war is not going to end until literally the Iranian regime falls. That's not something under our control. That might not just be a question of days or weeks. That could be months or years. And that's where the Venezuela parallel comes in. This shows to me a profound misunderstanding of the DNA of Iran, the degree of institutionalization of political, clerical, ideological leadership. Hundreds of thousands of people in the security forces, both the Revolutionary Guards as well as the militia. So to think that somehow the two situations are in any way analogous or parallel is frightening to me. So again, what keeps coming back to me is a lack of discipline as to analysis, as to making the case for why we're doing this, and above all now for war aims and what's our definition of success. And what we're seeing with the Iranian reaction, Iran gets a vote. Yeah, we started the war, but it takes everybody to finish it. And that's the danger. This could be open-ended. And by not consulting with Congress or the American people, the president has put himself on a high wire without a net below. And likely one of two things are going to happen, Jonathan. Either he's going to have to walk back ambitious war aims, or he's going to lose support. I don't think, and history suggests, you cannot sustain support for a war that is costly and doesn't seem to be on a trajectory of success.
So, General Herdling, a couple of things. First of all, and we'll be talking to John Meacham about this next block. But first of all, anybody that is trying to hold Donald Trump to any of the same sort of standards of previous presidents ramping up to war are going to be badly mistaken. We've already seen Maduro, who didn't take his threat seriously, could be living right now in Qatar on the beach. Instead, he's in a jail cell in Brooklyn. You can say the same thing of the Iranians. So I certainly the question will be at the end of this whether there is a method to that madness. But anybody that's looking at what this commander-in-chief is saying, what he's having his negotiators do, what he's saying to the press, they're kidding themselves, because this is the second time the Iranians have been surprised that Donald Trump did what he did in the past 6 months. So speak to that, but also speak, if you will, to the war aims. If you really dig in deep to this, both Israel and the United States, they are not interested in a hit and run here. It looks, again, from everything I've read and everything that's been reported, they're talking about ripping up the Iran's military infrastructure that they've been building up since 1979. Talk about that. Talk about the successes you've seen in the early part of this operation militarily, and also what, if you're there running it, what are your concerns in the coming days and weeks and possibly months?
Yeah, a couple things, Joe. Before I do that, if I could just comment on what everyone else has said. You know, David Ignatius, I loved his phrase improvisation, because it follows the ad hocism that was involved in the planning. And improvisation is great for jazz, not so much for combat. When lives are at stake and chaos is usually the environment. Richard said it's undisciplined. That's the way I see it as well. Jonathan said military objectives are extensive and being executed. Well, you know, we're repeatedly showing the strikes against targets, and, you know, those are all very successful. But as I was taught early on in my time in the military, showing precision strikes when the real question is to what end doesn't really help us right now. We're beyond the point of talking about the strikes, because you can win every engagement, hit every target, and lose the war. When we're talking about, I think, the Middle East, which I'm very familiar with and have a whole lot of scar tissue in, what I conclude is external strikes alone can't produce democratic change. We've seen that in multiple conflicts. We saw it in Desert Storm when 45 days of airstrikes was followed up by a ground campaign. If you don't have something to put in place afterwards, it's going to be even tougher than what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, because these strikes in the Middle East will usually strengthen the hardliners. It's going to create further chaos. You don't have a security force. If some of the targeting now is not only going after headquarters and air defense system, it's going after, formations where the Revolutionary Guards are, where the Beiji are. They're trying to kill those forces that provide security for a regime. So whenever you lose security in a society and you have people rising up looking for leadership, there's a huge disconnect. So what I would say from the military standpoint, yes, the strikes are being executed with great precision and effects. But I mean, I hate to say this as a military guy, you have to at one point say, so what? Are we just destroying things? Are we just bombing targets? What is going to happen right now? It is a pipe dream to think people are going to rise up when they're continuing to see their nation being struck, when their security forces are being dismantled, when there's no government leadership, when you don't have the people running the organization, and you have public unrest. Okay, great. First day, the leader was being overthrown. But now we're seeing the escalation in other countries. The last thing I'd talk about is the president, when he was talking to the New York Times last night, talked about the amount of munitions that are being used. 2,000 strikes as of this morning, about that number. Precision weaponry used in all of them. Defenses systems like the Patriot missiles and the THAAD batteries that are protecting various Gulf states and soldiers in the regions have very expensive missiles that they shoot. Those can only last so long. And as we've said, the intel estimates say that Iran has anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 missiles that they can launch. You can only shoot them down with so many defensive weapons. So the dynamics of expenditure gets into something called battlefield math. And somebody at the Pentagon is now concluding, where are we taking risk around other places in the world? I know they're doing that in the Pentagon because that used to be my job. When we were in Iraq and Afghanistan in the early 2000s, my job as the J7 to say, what risk are we incurring elsewhere as we're using all of our resources, intelligence gathering, formations, airplanes, naval ships, and especially weapon systems that cost a lot and take a long time to produce, are all on the ballot to say, how long can we conduct these strikes? 4 to 5 weeks, as the president said in the New York Times last night, is a very long time.